Buling has just been announced for version 2.8 of Wuthering Waves, and she is going to be our first ever 4-star character within the 2.0 patch cycle. And let's be honest, she's also most likely going to be the last. I'm actually pretty excited for her because I like Buling, I think she's funny. And as usual, I have my own speculation. However, with Buling, there's not as much information on what she might do as there would be on someone like Chisa, for example. So a lot of my speculation won't actually be based on any real information within the game or any real deduction. It's basically just gonna be my rambling and what I would like to see from her. So, because she's a 4-star character, we have to keep this in mind when it comes to designing her kit. I think the biggest thing that I want to see out of Buling, because she's a 4-star, is seeing an alternative to some 5-star characters that feel like they're way too dominant and way too necessary for some characters. And I am, of course, talking about the negative status crowd. Not specifically Phoebe or Shakona, because I think those two characters are fine when it comes to their team diversity. So it is primarily Zani and Karthia that I would like to see get an increase from having a 4-star teammate. Something else that you could consider for a 4-star teammate is a liberation buffer. Liberation damage dealers only have Yinlin, Genshin, and maybe Changli if you want to counter, and they all have some sort of issue. Yinlin, I guess, works because she has good personal damage, but her buffing isn't optimal. Changli and Genshin have way too long rotations, with Genshin also just not having great damage output. So having Buling be either a Resonance Liberation buffer or some kind of negative status buffer will, in my opinion, help the game out a lot more than just getting another mediocre at best DPS character. Because Lumi was meant to be a DPS character, but her DPS was so bad that despite her long rotations, people are still using her as a buffer. So yeah, let's make sure we make the character actually good at their job here. If the character is bad, it doesn't matter what they do. But before I dive too deep into what I believe her kit should do, I want to talk about her attribute and weapon type. Because obviously, as someone who's been waiting for Buling, I have my own theories. I believe Buling should be a Spectro character, for two primary reasons. One of which being that, well, she just looks like a Spectro character, but let's be honest here, Kuro Games rarely ever follows this sort of line of thinking. But the other reasoning makes a bit more sense. Well, I say that, but it's still kind of a stretch. In the version 2.4 story, Buling gave us a copper mirror, and this copper mirror was used to reveal events of the past like we did with Mia. Mirrors reflect light, and this is also part of Spectro looking at the inspiration for Phoebe's abilities, because Phoebe's abilities are all about using mirrors and reflecting light. So a mirror-based ability would definitely fit within the bounds of Spectro. This is definitely the most iffy I've been on a character's attributes because we just don't have any information about Buling at the current moment, but I believe Spectro would make sense. I do have a little bit more evidence for her weapon type, however, which I believe is going to be gauntlets. This is because, yet again, within the 2.4 story, it was mentioned that Buling was a Taoist monk trained alongside Genshin. And Genshin, obviously, is a 5-star Gauntlets character. Buling being trained alongside her, it would only be natural that they use the same weapon type. Now obviously nothing about this is set in stone, and I do believe that when Kuro eventually releases the attribute and weapon, it's gonna be something very different. But these are just my current theories. But with that out of the way, I want to talk a bit more about what I believe Buling should do and how I believe Buling should function. I do want to run with the Spectral Gauntlets assumption first, because that's my own theory, but there is definitely a lot more that they can do with this character. Because the 4-star roster that we currently have is, honestly, kind of tragic. So running with the Spectro assumption and what I said earlier, if she does end up being a Spectro character, I believe that she should be a Spectro Frazzle focused character who tries giving Zani a bit more of a boost when it comes to budget teams, as well as being a good teammate for DPS Phoebe, because she's also a Spectro Frazzle based DPS. So how would we go about doing this? We would need Buling to apply approximately 20 stacks of Spectro Frazzle during her rotation, because this is the amount of stacks that Zani requires to have maximum blaze. If you intend to use Spectra Rover, we can also very easily lower this down to 10 stacks of Frazzle from Buling, because the other 10 are provided by Spectra Rover. However, I think that the extra flexibility of having 20 stacks would be better. And I believe these stacks should be split up in different ways. I believe that on the field, Buling should apply around 10 stacks, and then the remaining 10 should be applied from off-field. This is because within Whimpering Wastes, Phoebe really needs Spectrofrazzle to be applied on the enemy if you want to run her as a main DPS, and the only way to currently achieve this is with Shakona. So I believe that Buling could be a nice alternative to Shakona within the Phoebe team for Whimpering Wastes. And because Buling would apply 10 stacks of Frazzle while on the field, it still works well enough for Zani to where she doesn't have any sort of backloaded Blaze generation. And also, because she would apply Spectrofrazzle over time, this would give Zani the ability to perhaps sneak in an extra Nightfall if the Spectrofrazzle application is fast enough. Now these would be all nice and great benefits, but without real buffing, I don't think she would really find much use. So I believe her outro skill should be 20-50% Spectral damage amplification, and she should also have a 20% attack buff within her S6. This would give her some actual value as a buffer. For Zani, the buff would barely mean anything, because Phoebe gives her 100%, so it would still not make Buling better than Phoebe. It would simply be an alternative character. Giving her Spectral damage amplification on her outro, however, would mean that Phoebe finally has an actually solid teammate to play with, because as a DPS, Phoebe's teams are kind of all over the place, and she doesn't really have a solid core for her main DPS team other than Spectra Rover to apply her Frazzle. So within my perfect world, that's what a Buling kit would look like. But there is obviously other things they can go with a 4-star. We can definitely look at some things that 4-star characters just don't really have that they do need. I already mentioned Liberation buffing before, and a potential Cardathea teammate that isn't Shakona. But something else I kind of forgot to mention is Buling could be a healer. Our only good healer that we have currently in the 4-star roster is Baija, and with Galbrenna and Augusta going back to being Shorekeeper users, the conversation of getting another good healer character is right back on the menu. So while I believe that Buling being a healer would mean she automatically isn't going to be that good of a character for a lot of high investment accounts, she definitely would be a good alternative for accounts that don't have as much investment. Not everyone has a Shorekeeper, although everyone should have a Shorekeeper, and not everyone has Furlova or Cardathea's full teams. So getting another generalist healer would definitely still help out a ton of accounts. And if she's a 4-star, that would help out basically every account. Because, well, getting a 4-star character is essentially inevitable. It's only a matter of time. So I definitely believe that Buling should either be a Spectrofrazzle support or some kind of generalist healer. But that's just my opinion. What do you think of Buling? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, if you have any questions, you should check out my Discord server, which is linked in the description. If you just want to see more of me, you can also check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. I don't post often there, but when I do, it's just kind of what I feel like posting. But that'll be all from me. Peace.